overcast and cloudy, but it's still like in the 50s, I guess. So, and I don't think that storm is going to hit us. It's going to be further
Good.
north. But we
Good.
did get snow on Saturday here. Yeah, isn't that
Wow.
crazy? Yeah, yeah. I was gonna
Wow.
anyway. I was gonna pull up a
Yeah.
picture. Yeah, palm trees with snow on it. So yeah,
That
we,
is,
we
yeah, something that you don't see very often. So,
no, we got
yeah.
12 inches last year here, and it lasted like for 3 days. It was crazy. But we're so far. We're in Perdido. I don't know if you know where that
Okay. Yep.
is.
Yeah.
So we're so far like toward Alabama and North Florida that we still get a lot of that Georgia, Alabama weather. It just But we
Right.
also get the benefit of we're by the water, so we do get, a little bit longer summer, but we get the breeze of the water. So it's actually, to me, more pleasant down here because we don't have that humidity that we get up in like that mountain region. You get
Yes.
the
Yes.
the valley.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm very excited about this, and in just a minute, I'll just kind of go ahead and start with a formality. But I
Okay.
wanted to tell you, so we're going to do a recording,
Okay.
and then we'll go through and I'll get the editor to clean everything up. I'll send you that. I've not gotten with Katie yet, but I am going to get with Katie because I want to use her for some promotional things that'll
Yeah.
go with it.
Okay.
You have full access to use as much or as little as you want. Use on your social, depend on websites to send to the newspaper,
Okay.
whatever you want. And then next week, I'm very excited. Next week, I'll be interviewing. Her name's Michaela Buchanan, and she was over the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the whole state, and her specific role was early learning and the impact it had on the economy.
Okay.
So I'm interviewing her, and we're going to tie back her conversation to this one to
Okay.
talk about how important it is for communities to support childcare, how employers should support childcare and their working families, and it all just the connection there
Right.
that
Right.
you're not on an island. So I think that'll be really good too, and I'll send you that and tag you and all that. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
I
I'm
think I think
excited.
I think it'll be good. And if you have to look down, I have to look down occasionally for my notes and stuff. And we just when we're doing that, then just the other speaker, we zoom in on them and we cut away from
Okay.
me. So
Perfect.
don't worry if you're like
Perfect.
looking. That's okay.
Okay.
We get all
Okay.
that. We get all that taken care of. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. Okay.
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 Yeah.
All right. So today, we're going to be talking about one of the most important, and I would venture to say, undervalued professions in our community. And I can say that from a perspective of I was a classroom teacher, and this conversation specifically is very personal to me because Michelle, we're going to do introductions, but your Learning Academy, your child care center is in the community where I raised my children, where I taught school, where I worked at the district office, overseeing literacy and academic impact. And I know what happens if we don't get this right in the early years. And so
Absolutely.
I'm really excited to be able to talk to you today and really highlight the great work that you're doing and the great work that you're bringing forward in the community. So let's get into it. Michelle, tell us a little bit about you, where you are, and the center that you're an owner director of.
Yeah. So I'm Michelle Gilbert, and I am a born in Rome all my life, and I am married to a lineman who works a very, crazy schedule. And when we had our daughter, I had by like 3 months in, I was like, okay, I've heard things. I need to go ahead and get on a list for, childcare facilities. And so about 3 months in, I decided to go ahead and get on some list in the area and knowing that there was a wait list for those. And so I had her and I was going back to work and still did not have a spot available. And so then it kind of, my mind started like turning of, oh my goodness, like there's a need for this in Floyd County. And luckily, I was able to get in somewhere and go back to my job. That lasted for about a month to a month and a half, and I eventually wound up pulling her, my daughter. We did not have the best time at there, and so I had met with someone else who already had a child care facility, and I actually partnered with them to start the Children's Academy West at that time. And so we moved right on pretty quickly of opening a center, and within 6 months had the Children's Academy West open here in Floyd County.
Wow. Well, that was going to be my next question. What led you to make this really big leap? Because I knew it wasn't for financial gain. The profit margin on childcare centers is very, very slim.
You're right.
So, yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that story. I did not know that. So, really, you saw a need and you stepped in to fill that gap. And I think what you shared about, you know, quickly realizing that where your child wasn't the best fit for them. I think that is, a conversation and an idea that many, many families mull over. Am I making the right decision? Is this the best fit? And sometimes just having a spot trumps, is this the best fit? Because as you mentioned, many of our communities don't have enough spaces for the number of families and children that need a space, particularly when we think about infant care. And we're going to talk a little bit more about under the age of one because, the ratios and the needs are just exponential, right? Before we take too much of a dive into the center, I want to talk about what's really happening because you went into this eyes wide open. You had a personal investment because you want to give your child the very best possible opportunity. And so I want to talk about a couple of what I call truths about early brain development and specifically around brain development under the age of 3 and what's happening. So we know that, and you can reference back to when you were pregnant, we know that it's actually starting in utero. Like even before your baby is born, they are learning and developing and they're taking in, their hearing is developed and they're taking in so much based on what mom and her extended family is doing in her life, right? And so immediately when a child is born, mirror neurons are activated. They're imitating everyone around them. When you meet with families and they're coming to learn more about your center, or maybe they're just, starting, they've got their children enrolled and they're coming in, do you think that your families really understand the magnitude of what's happening in those first 3 years? What have you noticed?
Right. So the biggest thing is, by age 3, they tell us that a child's brain is 80 to 90% developed by that time frame. And sometimes we get children from birth all the way up until they leave us to go to pre-K, and sometimes I don't get children until they already are 3 and they've been somewhere else. The brain develops in a what I like to use as a use it or lose it type method, especially up until age 3. Connections that are often through talking, playing, being comforted, exploring those types of things. And so it's really, really important for us early educators to get to know that, and so that those are the things that we can really engage in and really tune in on when we are developing these relationships with not only the families but the child. And so the first 3 years are when the brain, they say, is growing the fastest, most flexible and adaptable, and most influenced of everyday relationships. And so it's really important to me that the teachers know this and that they are using methods in the classroom that we are helping shape those little minds in those
Yeah.
first 3 years.
Yeah, wow. Like you know a lot and that's exhibited in how you structure your center, how you support your teachers in the classroom, and I want to talk a little bit about that. You mentioned the use it or lose it, and I love that you brought that up. I think that's new information for a lot of families. We think about learning never stops, and it starts in utero, and and that is true. I don't know. My boys are much older now, and I try to be very intentional and read and talk and be present. I don't think I realized until much later in life how much is happening in those first 3 years. And as you mentioned, with 80 to 90% of the brain being developed in those first few years, it's the connections that are made, the experiences that they have that really form the architecture for any future learning. So I referenced earlier about being a classroom teacher, and our teachers are working tirelessly to take children from where they are to where we want them to be or maximize their potential. But if they don't have that strong foundation of language and literacy and social emotional regulation, if they don't have that built early on, it's really hard to rewire that existing
Absolutely.
architecture because those neurons, not to get too technical, have been pruned away because the brain and body was like, oh, we don't need these, so let's get rid of them. So,
Correct.
so let's talk about, and again, I think that's information. It's like, wow, I think had I known a little bit more, maybe I would have been more observing in what they did or intentional. But let's talk about, because you mentioned about talking with your teachers and making sure that they're getting to know the children. So how do you ensure that your staff is able to provide those consistent, engaged relationships?
Yeah, so the best way, it comes down to intentional systems and making sure that I am modeling how I want things to run in the classroom. When I'm walking into a classroom, I'm making sure that I'm on the child's level. I'm making sure that whatever I'm modeling when I'm walking in is what I want the staff to be doing as well, and these teachers to be picking up on. We do take credit course hours every single year, and I'm pretty free on that. I let them kind of choose what they feel is needed, and kind of go from there. Like but if I feel that a staff needs, certain areas that need some pruning and some work, then I say,
Yeah.
hey, I think this course might be a better fit for you. But like I said, I think it's the intentional systems of how I set the stage for how I want a classroom to be ran, and also modeling that for them as well when I'm walking in, so that they're seeing what my expectations are for them.
Yeah. Well, two things that you mentioned that I just love that you brought out. One is being on eye level. And one of the things that's come out in research, actually before the pandemic, we know during the pandemic, children had a learning loss, which really was perplexing to me, I think, because if you think about more children were at home with their families during that time, during the pandemic, before we were able to get back, into our routines, they were home more. So it would make sense if children were home more that they were around their families and more language. But what the research has told us, and it actually dates back before the pandemic, is that a lot of families are on screens, whether that's their computer or their phone. And, we understand we're doing this now, a virtual call. That necessitates work being done sometimes. But to your point, children really need to learn language through eye contact and looking at our face. Like that's how they learn half of our language, looking at our eyebrows and our tone is expressed just through facial expressions. And working with toddlers who are just wanting to take in everything around them, you've got to get right on their eye level and make sure that you have their attention, or
Right.
their little brain is not paying attention, right? Because
Yeah.
they have so many wonderful things that they're wanting to learn.
Right.
So I love, one, that you are making sure that you're on their eye level and really focusing in on them reading your face, even before, with your little ones, even before they can use words, we can begin to interpret what they need by nonverbal communication. So
Right. Right.
it's so very important, and I try to encourage families to just be aware of that. Even
Yeah.
if you have your phone in front of you, if your child's asking a question, at least at the minimum turn and face them to answer.
Right. Right.
And then second to that, I love that you're modeling, not only modeling for your staff, but modeling for the children. Like this is how we engage with other people.
One
And
to
so
kind of,
that's a really great, and not, yeah.
yeah, sorry, to kind of build on that. Another thing is that I learned while my child was elsewhere, consistency is huge. There is so much that, especially a toddler and even a baby, a little tiny baby, they know who people are and they get used to those people. And so making sure that I have a consistent body that is the same teacher in classrooms. We don't have a lot of turnover. Like I try to make sure that that is something that we stay on top of, is that the consistency is there, that in the mornings they're seeing that same person, in the afternoons they're seeing that same person, and these sometimes teachers are working full days. And I know a lot of centers divide the days up and stuff like that, but I've just learned that the consistency with children goes a really, really long way. And that kind of leads me into ratios. I know different states have different ratio systems. And in Georgia, we'll just use the ones, for example, right now. It's 1 to 8. And so for every 8 children, we are required to have one staff in there. My room right now is licensed for 15 children, and we have 3 staff members in there for these 1 year olds. And so while we are in ratio, and we will
Mhm.
always remain in ratio, I
Yes.
think having a third body for that age group has been very, very beneficial to, keeping things consistent, making sure that we are able to give that one-on-one care and not hollering across the room and being able to
Mhm.
get down on eye level and just those things that really truly matter that I don't think in the long run, people really realize until it's too late.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm glad that you brought that specific ratio and example up because people can easily identify with that. I mean, think about if you had 8 children of your own, like you birthed. I can't even come up with a number. It's
Yeah.
more than quadruplets, right? Like double quadruplets, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine
Correct.
doing that. So yes, the consistency and the routine and predictability is as important for the children as is for the caregivers.
Yes. Yes.
So that is wonderful. And it also leads me to think of something else when we think about, you mentioned people may not realize that long-term benefit or consequence if you don't have adequate staffing to be able to meet the needs of the child. So James Heckman, he's an economist out of the University of Chicago. His life's work has been really understanding and studying um, early childhood behaviors and long-term outcomes. And he's done a lot of work looking at return on investment. So if we as a community, a parent, a caregiver invest X number of dollars, what that outcome looks like. And when we think about early childhood, the highest return on a dollar is working with 0 to 3. And when you get into 4 and 5 year olds, while you still can change those outcomes by investment of time, labor, and resources, it's not as exponential as that 0 to 3. And it goes back to what you said about that window of time when it's so, so very important. So you talk about staffing challenges, and I know across the nation we have challenges, and I started it really with being um, like the most important profession, in my opinion, in that 0 to 3 space is the early learning teachers, but it's also, I hate to say, the most undervalued economically because there's not the money there to support the work that they're doing. So there's a disconnect. We know that the largest percentage of opportunity to build a strong, thriving life and economy is 0 to 3, but we don't have the money there
Correct.
for that. How do you, and you talked about training your teachers from an owner operator perspective, like how do you manage that?
Yes. So we of course are licensed I'm in Georgia right now. So we are licensed through right from the start. And so they, again, going back to, standards and regulations and all of that, they require every licensed facility to take 10 course hours a year. And so it's great. We do ours every January. And like I said, sometimes I can go in and say, hey, I feel like I want you to take, this course that, because I feel like a teacher needs that. I really kind of leave it up to them about what they feel that they want to explore in that. Unless there's a need that I see,
Sure.
elsewhere. I have a phenomenal assistant director that has been with me since 2019 when I opened. And so a
Yeah.
lot of that load of staff, trainings and things like that is on her, which that's, I'm very, very thankful for. But we also go in rooms, both of us. We do, we're in and out of rooms. We are not in the office all the time. We are in those classrooms. We are changing diapers. We are feeding babies bottles. And so we're able to really see and gauge what each staff member needs. And I am let's address it up front instead of let's let this simmer and keep going. And just being able to, they all know that I'm an open book, but I also am a very, very type A and want my facility ran a certain way. And they all know that. And so being able to just have that open communication with them of, hey, like, this is what I saw you do, but I would really, really appreciate if going forward we can do X, Y, and Z. And having that open line of communication with them and training them on the spot. While the computer 10 hours that we're required to take is good, and we do gain stuff from that, we truly do. I think the more hands on stuff that you are in the classroom with that teacher and able to see and adapt them to what how you want things ran, to me is where the most you get the most benefit out of.
Absolutely. I love that approach, and that's a little uncommon. One of my first jobs was working in a
I
child
hear
care.
that a lot.
Yeah, and I love that. You walk the walk, you talk the talk, you're in there doing the work. And so, what comes to mind is a servant's heart. Like you are leading, by example. And I'm sure that your entire staff can attest to that. And another thing that I think about in listening to you talk, a lot of our behaviors just in life as adults were driven by the models or examples that we have. So, like, we may parent the way that we were parented. And if you're in a family where there's a husband and a wife, or two people, you're bringing how you parented together to parent this child or children, right? And so sometimes we don't know other ways of doing things. We don't know to get down on their eye level. We don't know the importance of, facing and that human bonding, connecting. So one of the things that we really try to focus on at Build a Brain is taking some of those big kind of theoretical, what research has taught us about brain development, and really paring it down to say, here's the why behind why we shouldn't be inserting screen time during the middle of a temper tantrum, or here's the why behind, because I think people deserve to know the why. And when you talk about working with your staff, I would assume that there's a lot of things that your staff is encountering that they haven't maybe been trained on and maybe don't know the why, but once you're explaining it to them, it makes a lot of sense. And of course you're going to do it differently because you understand what's really happening here. It's not the child being bad, it's maybe like their nervous system is in overload.
Yes.
They can't make a decision right now,
Right.
and we experience that as adults all the time.
Right.
So
And they just show
I
it in a different way than we do. But I'm glad that you said that because it is true. And the nervous system thing we see a lot in my threes and fours, and you can tell when they are dysregulated. I went on a 5-minute walk with a 4-year-old this morning, and we just did laps around the facility because that's what he needed. But it's
yeah.
also learning. I really try to tell the preschool teachers, especially, that it's not a one all approach. So just because it worked for him does not mean it's going to work for her. And so I really try to dig and teach them that we've got to figure out what works for the child at hand, not
Sure.
because, the book said to do it this way or because it worked for her, but each child has that individualized care that they need. And this child that I'm talking about, that's what works for them. When they are dysregulated and they are not coming out of it, we
Hmm.
walk.
Yeah.
And it's not getting on eye level and preaching at them and explaining what is going on. That is not what they need. But then, we have a little girl in there and that's what works for her. And so I really, really like to instill in them the individualized care on learning what approach works for what child.
Yeah. I love that. I do. And I'm going to go back to kind of how this conversation started. It appears to me through our conversation that you want every child to have the opportunity that you wanted for your own child, which is why you created and started this business. I want to stay on one train of thought when we think about children having meltdowns and tantrums, and then the use of screen time and technology. Just recently, earlier in the week, actually, I hosted a 30-minute webinar talking about the difference in a tantrum and a meltdown and how you navigate those differently, which is, what I hear you essentially saying. And so with children, once they get a little bit older into your twos and
Yeah,
threes,
yeah,
you can have tantrums, and it's goal oriented, like you want something to happen. And you typically, those children, and you can correct me if I'm wrong based on what you've seen, but typically they can communicate and articulate, and they're not going to be like sobbing and weeping. They may squeak out a crocodile tear, but it's more aggressive behavior and they're wanting something, right? And with a meltdown, is typically it's a sensory overload. Like they can't cope, they can't come out of it. That's not the time to punish, to lecture, to have a teachable moment. And so your example was perfect. Like they were in sensory overload and they needed that physical stimulation to actually just, the cortisol and serotonin to get in balance so that they can begin to kind of think again,
Right, right.
essentially. Yeah, yeah.
And
So I'm sure that
I
you see
like
both of those. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I like that because in this one, this little boy, he knows and he will ask to, step away. And
hmm,
so to me, he has come such a long way because he now knows, okay, at 4 years old, like I know. And so, but we have built on that and built on that. And that's what these relationships are all about. And so when I walked through this morning, I, sensed it and I said, "Do you want to go on a walk?" And he said, "I do." And so we went on a walk. And then he told me when he was ready to go back. And
yeah,
so, those are the things that, like I said, it goes back to that individualized care and how you were talking about the different, from a meltdown to a tantrum.
hmm,
And it's kind of different ages too. I feel like more your twos and everything are a little bit different than your threes and your fours and so on.
hmm,
But just like I said, building on what has helped him and knowing that individualized care for that student is what has really shaped that teacher to also be able to handle that student,
sure.
and know, okay, I see what you're modeling. I'm going to also implement that when the time is needed.
Sure. And that's hard. And when we think about, because I remember, I still can remember back 30, maybe 40 years ago, um, being in those 3-year-old rooms. And it's hard to allow, to know when the child needs to work through something and then when you need to intervene.
Correct.
It takes time, as you said, to get to know the child. I also see an increasing prevalence of a smartphone or a tablet, kids, having their little tablet in their hand. And while I'm not here to bash technology and tablets, I do know, and I'm curious if you've seen this or had encounters with, if we are giving a device to diffuse a situation, we are robbing that child of the ability to learn how to self-regulate. So,
Regulate.
yeah, so they're in the crisis, and I get it. Again, I've been a mom of two boys, and you're tired, and you've worked, and you've got dinner, and all the things. But I don't think that parents realize, when your child is in the midst of a full-blown tantrum,
Correct.
and if we're giving them a device, we're actually kind of reinforcing a behavior, and we're also increasing the likelihood that that's going to happen again, and they're not able to work out of it on their own without this external device being inserted. Do
Correct.
you do you see any of that in your classroom, or have parents asking, "How do you get him to calm down? I can't get him to calm down unless I give him a phone." Any of that
Yes,
near
we
you?
have kids walk in with mom or dad's phone in their hand in the morning, and you can
Uh-huh.
tell that it's just that was their way because it must have been a hard morning of
Yes.
them being able to get out the door and get them here and get themselves to work on time. And then we also see, we went outside the other day and a little boy came up to his teacher and he said, "I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to watch my tablet." And so it's kind of that showed, okay, well, when he gets home, he just gets put on a tablet. And so that kind of
Yeah.
explained too, like maybe some of the things, and it helps us. I'm not dissing that parent in any way, but it
Sure.
helps us understand, okay, so when he's bored and not wanting, we were outside at that time,
Hmm.
which most kids love, then he's used to getting in front of a screen. So when he doesn't want to, independent play by himself at home or something, he's given a screen. We do not have TVs in our classrooms here. It was a personal choice of mine,
Yeah.
but we do have one tablet in every classroom, and it's how the teachers communicate with the parents. However, it is very limited. So while we are waiting for lunch or the teachers are getting nap mats out, there's like a 10 or 15-minute time frame there that they are allowed to watch certain little clips of educational
Mhm.
shows. And
Yeah,
then at the end of the day, we also allow from those last, 30 or so minutes of the day before we combine in the evenings, another little, area so that we can get everybody into the bathroom and,
yeah,
get that end of day stuff task completed.
sure.
But it is very, very limited, and I purposefully do that. I limit my own daughter's screen time. She does have screen time, but it is very, very limited because I've told my husband, I said, if, we allow her a certain time, I notice a difference in her. She doesn't self-regulate well. She doesn't sleep well. She's not as focused or engaged with us once we do remove the
Mhm.
screen from her. And so I've even noticed putting a time cap on my own child, the difference that it makes. And so it kind of just reinforces what I've always started here since 2019 of why I don't want it to be in their face all day long. There's a time and a place for it, and that's kind of what I try to tell people.
Sure.
But of course, we can only do our part here and kind of let parents know, this may not be the best thing to go home and, sit. And with that
Sure.
little voice on the playground, it made us laugh because we were like,
Yeah.
no, go play. It's a beautiful day for once. We're about
Yeah.
to have horrible weather. Go play. And he
Yeah.
was adamant. He was ready to go home and he wanted his tablet. So,
Yeah.
we just really try to limit that here because I have seen firsthand with my own child and children here how it can really harm harm them. And by that I mean they don't self-regulate well. They're not going down for nap well. They're not like it's not a good tool.
Sure. Well, I'm sure that parents, when they're talking with you and interviewing and getting to know your facility, I'm sure that they really appreciate hearing that. And I know that there's a number of families out there that are very concerned about their children. They're trying to have screen-free or limited screen time at home and then going to school and, their interpretation of the school their child's attending is that their child has more access to computers than they want. And so
Yes.
that now, is a topic of conversation, but I'm sure that your parents appreciate you highly monitoring and garnering that time. Well, let's scratch at this just a little bit. Children who maybe have specialized needs. So, we've talked about a little bit about the intentionality and the eye contact and modeling and removing screen time, having predictability. All those are excellent, excellent best practices that you live by every day and you run your facility by and expect your staff to abide by. What about when you have children who have more specialized needs, whether that they have OT needs or speech language delays or any type of additional service or support that you're not able to provide in your facility? How do you navigate that with your families? Because I know that there are some services that are provided under the age of 3, and then we begin to age out if we don't start those referrals for the ability to get some of those services. And so, how do you navigate that conversation?
Correct. So we are very fortunate that we have a very good relationship with what in the state of Georgia is Babies Can't Wait.
Hmm.
And so they service up till age 3. So if we kind of see that there is something that we feel like maybe needs to be monitored or looked further into, then we bring a parent in and kind of sit them down and kind of let them know what we've been observing. And 9 times out of 10, the parent is like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you brought that up. I have noticed that. Let's proceed on with what we need to do. And a lot of times it's the pediatrician that catches it, sometimes before us. And it's not so much that we haven't noticed it, it's just that sometimes they grow out of things and it's not a conversation that needs to be had. And everything turns out to be fine. However, we have a great relationship with the Babies Can't Wait around Floyd County. And so they can service the child up until age 3 and they come directly into the facility, so they can you see the child in the classroom or they can remove the child from the classroom and service them that way, and that is that is huge. We have seen so many milestones be able to be met, and children graduate out of the Babies Can't Wait program. And then we have some that need a little extra care. So then when they hit that next age bracket, then we get, if you're in the city school zone or the county school zone, we go ahead and implement getting someone in contact and on board to follow that child on into their pre-K year, whether that's at a city or a county school. And that's, that could be speech, that could be OT, whatever it may be that child needs, this person would then follow them on. And a lot of times parents don't choose either one of those routes and they choose to go completely private. Which is totally fine, as well. It's making sure that we're having those conversations without, in a kind way as well. And making sure that they know that we are here to help with those resources, I think, because no one wants to hear that their child is quote unquote behind. But we're here to help. And that's my main mission in letting them know that it's okay. Like early intervention is proven to make a huge difference. And so letting us be on board with that has made, I think, a true impact on a lot of students that I've seen in the last 7 years. Like I said, a lot of times things that were, that they were being seen for, they graduate out before they go to pre-K, and it's a milestone. It's great. It's wonderful. And, those things have been met, and we've seen, major improvements with them inside the classroom as well.
Yeah, I love that there's so many things that we could talk just on what you just shared with me. The open communication is so vital. And again, that's another best practice that's not found in all early learning centers. It sounds to me that your staff is keenly aware of developmental milestones, behaviors, appropriate behaviors. They know what to look for and to model and support. And then that you have a very transparent, open relationship with your families, that you can have those conversations and they respect you. We talk about a parent as a child's first teacher, and they are, but shortly after that first teacher is the early learning teachers, because you're with them for many of these children during the predominant waking hours of that child's life. You are just as important and integral to that child's development as that family is during this time. And so you have valuable information, and I would assume that most parents greatly respect and appreciate that feedback, and then pulling in pediatricians or early interventionists. I'm curious, with the families that you've worked with over the years, have you heard back from any of your families, particularly if they have younger siblings and they're still in your center, from
Yes,
families
yes.
that have gone on to kindergarten or first grade to say, I'm so thankful that you did this, or, I appreciate you, helping me out with
Yes.
this. Any
I'm
feedback
so
there?
glad you asked that, because that is one of my absolute favorite things that I get to experience is when we have a child graduate out. We definitely hear from parents about how advanced that they are when they get to pre-K. Like, oh my gosh, are they going to be bored? Like, you've taught them so much, which is just, it makes me feel great. But then we also have a few teachers as well that I don't, I've never serviced their children or had them here or anything like that, but they always say, I want the children that are coming from the Children's Academy. And it absolutely makes me smile from ear to ear, because it's not just the academic side. We're working on manners when they get to that preschool room. We're teaching them how to open ketchup packets so that when they
Oh,
do get to
yeah.
pre-K, they're using those fine motor skills and they know
Yeah,
what to do. And so there's just so much that we could have a whole nother podcast on
yeah,
that, of
yeah.
stuff that we teach in that, and introduce in that preschool room, that when they go to pre-K, I feel like that's what the teachers are like, wow, okay, like. And so it makes me, I hate bragging, but it makes me smile
No.
ear to ear, because around September-ish we usually hear from, I would say, 2 to 3 teachers in the county, and then a couple of family members by September, October, that have gotten notes home from teachers of how impressed they are with their child, and have asked them, did they go somewhere before coming into
Mhm.
pre-K or something like that? And so those stories just absolutely make what I do worth it.
I love that. I do. And it's not bragging. You're just stating the obvious that there's a distinct difference because you have a pathway and plan and you've set those children up for success. I love that. Well, as we begin to conclude, I do want to talk about the community's role, the community's impact, and more specifically, the impact that you make on your community. You are a pillar in that community because you are preparing these children for their next phase in life and you're setting them up well. If you could say something to your community, like what do you wish the community understood? Because I don't think all communities really understand how important and vital this work is and how vital it is that business owners, the chamber, employers support. And you can support in a variety of ways.
Right.
What would you say to community members?
So my building was actually, I've been here for 7 years and it's been under a lease type thing. And while I know that the community knows the importance and need for the child care, I don't think they realized it until a couple of weeks ago. My building was actually put on the market by the owner and is to be sold. And so I, of course, let families know that. And I think that is what set into play. Oh my goodness, if the Children's Academy goes out of business, what are we going to do? There is truly not enough, you know, licensed facilities in Floyd County to sustain the amount of children that we have. And we've recently had another one close in our county. And so there was an influx of children that I don't know where they went. I don't have the space, and so I don't know where they went, but I know that we had people lining up in the parking lot to say, hey, we've just gotten this news and we need a spot. And it was like that for 2 to 3 days until word got out. We're a small community that there was no space here. And the community, I think, if I could just stress anything, is that the importance that we are pouring in and back into these early care learning centers, whether that's mine or the 7 others that we have in Floyd County, is crucial. What we are doing, every center in this county and surrounding counties as well, is huge. We are making daily impacts on these children's lives and we need support. There is not enough support from community. There's not enough support from the state level for early care learning centers at all, especially those like myself who wish to remain on a private level. And there's reasons behind that. And some centers do wish to remain private. And like I said, there are reasons behind that. But having the community support to back these facilities would make a huge difference, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Recently, back in the summer, I was asked to be on a child care kind of summit task force to look at the needs here in the county where I currently live. And there are particular areas within the county where there's not access to 0 to 1 child care. And lots of family, friends, and neighbors, we call FFN, lots of families, friends, and neighbors are taking care of children. And while that's wonderful and good, I don't know that those children always get the same type of experiences that you provide. Just that example made me kind of laugh about opening ketchup packets.
Yeah.
Kindergarten teacher, I can't tell you how many times I've had
Right.
tears over trying to open Jello, cups and that were like super
Yes.
glued to the top. Yeah,
Yes.
and how
Yes.
many mustard and mayonnaise packets
I
I've
know.
opened. So I appreciate that. There are just so many things that you're able to provide, consistency just being one of the many things. And so going back to the story on the task force, one of the things that came out of our task force is relevant to your conversation is the city has then said, okay, we don't have enough space. We have people who are interested in coming in to be child care directors, but we don't have space. And so our mayor donated space that's going to be a 0 to 1 space and then has already earmarked 2 additional sites in a high needs area that will be our 1 to 2 and 2 to 3 year old spaces as we build that out. That's just one example where, your city county government can say, okay, what kind of space do we have available that we can come in because the work that you're doing directly goes back to a thriving community, allowing families, I know a couple of the families who send their children to your center, those families, one particular is in healthcare. She can go to work because you're able to care for her children while she's at work. So, I'm going to just add on to your message. City and county government and employers, can think about just dedication of space, land, or pulling together resources to allow people such as yourself to continue to do the work that
Absolutely.
you're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
Because the
as we
funding is
conclude,
just not there.
right, and that goes for staffing, but it seems like, in some conversations I could go deeper with turnover and staffing, but it sounds like you've created such a culture that your staff wants to be there. Obviously, if you had more money, to push out to them, you would, but we also have to be mindful, being private, of keeping tuition rates affordable
Exactly.
for the families. It's a delicate balancing
It is.
act with very, very small margins. Well,
Yes.
as we come to a close on the hard days, and I know there are many, what
Yes.
keeps you going?
Definitely the relationships that I have built with the children and their families. There have been many, many days where I have gone home and I'm like, I don't even know why I'm doing this. Like, as you said, it's not a financial thing. You don't get into childcare, especially a private childcare center, and think, oh, I'm going to make, thousands
Money.
and thousands and thousands. It is something that truly is a passion of mine. It is something that I had a personal relationship with having my daughter and seeing kind of what the need was in my area and knowing the care that I wanted her to have. And I think that is what has been able to help me build the facility that I have, is that I constantly look at these children and I'm like, they are mine. They are mine. They are my responsibility. They are mine, and I want them to absolutely have the best care. We are not perfect in by any stretch of the imagination. But if the child leaves and the parent knows they were well fed, they were well cuddled that day, and they got the special attention that they need, then we're calling that a good day. We are absolutely calling that a good day, because while academics are important and while, things are cuddling a baby and talking to them and having them coo back at you, that will bring tears to your eyes. And those are the moments that make me continue doing what I do. I know in my heart that this is making an impact on many families in our community, and I know that there are many children that we have made lasting impacts on as well. I saw a little one the other day at a chiropractor visit I was going to, and I did not think that she would remember me. She is in second grade now. Yes, second grade. And she remembered me and she lit up and she ran up to me. And it was just that, it was kind of a God moment because of everything that's going on with my building. And it was like God knew I needed that moment. And
Mhm.
she remembered me and she, was just so excited to see me. And that absolutely just made my day. And like I said, and that just proves to me that the impact that not just me, but the staff here are making is huge.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michelle Gilbert, owner and director of the Children's Academy in Rome, Georgia, for answering the calling, and you're building a legacy.
Yeah.
So carry on. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time today.
Thank y'all so much for having me. It was such an honor and I enjoyed it so much.